Page Farm and Home Museum. Dedicated to preserving the values of rural life which have made Maine such a unique place to live. This classic example of post and beam architecture is a graceful reminder of a simpler time when things were built to last. Upon entering the museum, you'll discover treasures from Maine's past. The local post office. And Brownie's Kitchen, with everything needed for a hot, home-cooked meal. And of course, Farnsworth General Store. Built in the mid-1800s, the barn is one of the oldest structures on the University of Maine campus, originally part of a barn that evolved into the State College and Agricultural Experiment Station. Saved from demolition by a small group of concerned faculty and staff, the barn would be reborn as the Maine Farm and Home Museum.
This groundbreaking ceremony really is symbolic of a beginning and of an end. It's the end of the first phase that our committee has gone through in trying to conceptualize this museum, trying to get through the initial fundraising, but it's the beginning, it's the real beginning now of the time that we're going to be able to build a museum, to move it to its new foundation, and to renovate it into what we see as a celebration of Maine rural life.
President Glick, it's my great pleasure this afternoon to present to you on behalf of the Maine Historic Preservation Commission this certificate that signifies that your barn is on the National Register of Historic Places. And this signifies that it is a building which contributes to the history and the architecture of Maine. I think we all share the concern that our agricultural heritage out in the landscape is rapidly disappearing, and that the move that we make today is going to ensure that a very important piece of that be preserved for now and the future.
This facility, well over 100 years old, something that will be part of Maine into the long-term future for our young people and for those of us who won't be so young who will come back to visit it. It will be part of what we have to offer people when they come to this campus. We have a very nice art museum. We have a fantastic museum in the Maine Center for the Arts, the Hudson Museum, and now we're going to have a museum that will complement those, namely the Maine Farm and Home Museum. And when I fully understood the concept, how could I be anything but very, very supportive?
Maybe that's enough. Shall we double right there?
Yeah. Right.
How about right there?
Look right up.
Hey!
In order to save the barn, it first had to be moved from its old location to the new site. After a successful fundraising effort, the time came for the move. Professor Hayden M. Sewell, Jr., chairman of the Farm and Home Museum Board of Directors.
I think the highest point that that has occurred here, other than the opening about a month ago, was the day that we physically actually moved the barn from the old location. It had been 3 months that Clayton Kopp and his group of people were over to the barn, jacking it up, changing the sills, putting in new sills, and then finally, one afternoon, the whole thing just kind of gave a big twitch and it moved. And that was such a thrill to actually see that happening. The next morning, as it came between the buildings over here and came off into the parking lot, I think all of us realized that we had really done it at that point, that things were going to the point where we really were going to have a barn and we were going to have a museum from it.
The silo came from the old Witter farm and was moved by Don Arnold and the Sargent Corporation.
Museums are, of course, places to see historical objects and to find out the story behind them. There were a lot of stories told at the University of Maine this weekend. Yesterday, a new museum was dedicated. Jeffrey Hope was there and tells us more.
How did they get anywhere in this thing? And how would this hold an entire horse? Questions that will probably be asked many times by the generation that isn't used to planting corn by hand. This is the new Page Farm and Home Museum at the University of Maine. President Hutchinson rode in behind a team of draft horses just to help dedicate it. From now on, all these tools will help tell the story of how Mainers used to farm. How appropriate that tour guides will tell their stories in this old barn. President Hutchinson spent a lot of time in his family's barn.
It was a place where, when it was a rainy day, the men would get together, one family or another, right? And chat, tell stories, often the same stories they told many other times. Everybody's still alive. Most of the stories I tell are the ones that I've heard in the barn.
Henry Page donated $100,000 to turn this barn into a museum. They told him he could name it after anything he wanted, so he dedicated it to his parents. He told us the story of how they were farmers back at the turn of the century. They raised cattle, hogs, and apple orchards.
They also raised a lot of children. I'm glad they didn't talk too much about birth control then, because I was number 10, I'd never made it.
There were other stories, too, today, and there will no doubt be many, many more. That's what museums are for. Henry Page really said it best when he told us, "It's great we've got this old barn to show people what happened a long time ago."
But our plans for the future involve working very, very closely with groups in the state, like the Maine Grange, for instance, or the Orono Historical Society. The support groups are the commodity groups, like the Maine potato growers people, the blueberry people, the apple people, the dairy people, in order to put through some kind of a good display area here that will truly represent the past. And this is what we want to do. We don't want anything to do with the future. We're past people, and we want to introduce the past to everybody.
Another window into Maine's rural past was added to the Page Farm and Home Museum in the summer of 1994. The town of Holden donated this one-room schoolhouse to the University of Maine. Built in 1855, this schoolhouse served the educational needs of Holden for a century before it closed and fell into disrepair. In late June 1994, the generous contributions of Joe Sear and Tom Thornton helped bring the building across the Penobscot River to the UMaine campus. Once in place, renovations on the building got underway. A new roof was put on by volunteers, and a local Boy Scout troop helped out with painting. This structure will serve as a living reminder of Maine's educational history. Other projects currently in the works at Page Farm and Home Museum include the Heritage Garden, which will feature many long-forgotten heirloom species of fruits and vegetables that used to be vital to Maine agriculture. There are also plans for the renovation of this structure, which will become the Winston E. Pullen Carriage House. It will house large wheeled antique farm equipment and provide much needed storage space. The museum and all of its display areas will transport visitors back to a simpler time when farm life and agriculture were a vital part of every Maine citizen's life. The goal of the museum board of directors is to create a $1 million endowment that will guarantee the long-term future and operation of the Page Farm and Home Museum. When that goal is realized, the creation of a living, working farm community that will preserve a key part of Maine's past will be ensured.
I'm pleased to be with you this fine July morning to talk about the Page Farm and Home Museum. This is a very essential element of our campus as it's developing. It's very important for the people of the state of Maine and also for our students and faculty that we preserve the heritage that has come from rural Maine. It is not that agriculture is a thing of the past. It is not. It is very important still to Maine's economy. But the culture of how farm families lived in the past is important to preserve. It gives us a record of the change that has occurred over time. It is also important that we have this schoolhouse that has been donated as part of this entire complex, because I think it symbolizes how important rural people felt that education was for their youngsters. And so each of the towns, in one way or another, provided for that education. The facility is but a living memory of that. So I'm delighted that you have shown interest and continue to be involved with this museum. We hope you can continue to support it.